Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and I'm so excited to be here with this amazing group of people. And it's interesting times for all of us, an opportunity for us to advance what we're very passionate about and get it out into the real time. But I'd like to start by bringing a colleague of mine up on the stage, Sarah Tico. Are you here, Sarah? Yay. I wish I could say that I'm surprising Sarah with this award, but I'm not, because I had to warn her. Let me tell you the story. Back right before the pandemic, back in the time where we were still meeting in person, back in 2000, come on up. We were still meeting in person, but we had just started. This was March 2nd, I think, or so we were just starting to go like this, a few of us, but we were still meeting in person. And we had the International Virtual Reality Health Association meeting in Nashville. We had one day of meetings. That night, a tornado came through. And the next day, we still had the meeting, but Sarah and her colleague, Sarah Hill, were on top of things. And you grabbed all the VR headsets that you could and went out to the Red Cross shelters to help mitigate the stress of both the people who were affected that evening by the tornado. And it was just a mile or two from where the conference center was at Vanderbilt. And you were very on top of things, very sharp and savvy about what you were doing. And so, Sarah, I have this award for you. It reads IVRHA Hero Award to Sarah Tico in acknowledgement and appreciation for your leadership, compassion, and dedication. So, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. No, it was really quick thinking. I think if later we had said we should have done that, we would have felt different. But you did it, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Really
Do you want to say anything about the experience of doing that at all?
I didn't really think I was going to say anything.
You don't have to.
Yeah, I think that the response was actually really inspired by my colleague Ross O'Brien from a disaster that actually happened in the UK back. I can't even remember how long ago it was now, but there was something called the Grenfell Fire, where there was a whole sort of block of houses that set on fire, and they found it really difficult to engage with clearly very traumatized communities after that. Putting up a poster and saying, hey, do you want to talk about your mental health, was not really appealing to people. And so they set up a VR lab where they had a range of psychologists and healthcare professionals that were like, do you just want to come and play games with us? And so they just had Tilt Brush and Beat Saber and all the classics. And they managed to increase access into something called improving access to psychological therapies through the NHS by just having people playing games. And so I think that was a bit of an inspiration, and he sort of cheerleaded me through that moment. So yeah, I was glad that we could help.
Well, thank you for
so
being so on top of things and for making a difference.
Oh, thank you so
Yeah.
much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
So jumping into my talk now, I'm excited to be here. I have several centers of gravity that for my academic work, and my main spot is the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab. But I work as a translational neuroscientist. What I do is try and take the findings from academic groups, not just at Stanford, but at other locations, and move them out into the world where they can make a difference clinically and promoting health and wellness. I'm empowered and motivated for that because I spent time as the director of the Mind Division for the Stanford Center on Longevity. And what I became aware of is that we have a looming crisis. I'm sure many of the people in this room are aware of this also. The US population has doubled since the 1960s, but family sizes have gotten smaller. So if we just do the math, it's not a matter of theory, we're gonna have a problem about 10 or 15 years with aging out seniors who have additional health problems. 3 out of every 7 of us will have a neurodegenerative disease when we're in our 80s and 90s, and many of us are going to live a lot longer than previous generations. Most of us will. And unless we do something about it, it's going to be a severe economic crisis, worse than the pandemic. It may even be worse than some of the things we're seeing from global warming. We have some time, but we need to start moving on it. And the only answer really is to transform healthcare with technology. So that's what motivates me. I've had the pleasure of working with a number of early stage companies, later stage companies, large healthcare networks who are all also pushing to make a difference and address some of these issues. And some of the things that we're doing in this zone at this conference are going to be directly relevant. And I'll try and speak to that during the course of my talk. But right now what I want to talk to you about is effective computing, its relevance to gaming and its relevance to healthcare. Now, we know that our future, and it's hard to say, is it 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it's already starting, is going to be driven by our technology, our systems, our buildings, our automobiles, sensing us and adapting their behavior to be more efficient for us. They'll understand our health status, our emotional state, and try and do good things with that information. Now, we can talk later about the problems with that, but that's where a lot of consumer electronics is going right now. And AR and VR technology, wearable sensor technology, it's all contributing to this zone of sensing our state. And it's also being enabled by what's going on with improvements in machine learning, federated computing assessments, ways to make sense of small batches of data to understand emotional state. It's just a very brief definition. Effective computing is the study of and development of systems that recognize, interpret, process, and in some cases simulate human emotions. And we do that all the time. We have a social brain and systems built into our neural networks of our brain to interpret the emotional state of others. We can effectively read the mind of other people. We look at their nonverbal communication, their facial expressions, their gestures, their voice tone, and we make conclusions about what mood they're in, whether they're alert or sleepy, whether they're on top of things or not. We're very good at this. We've evolved to be very good at being social animals. So now we're trying to get our technology to also be good at doing this sort of interpretation. But it's not easy. There's a lot of pattern recognition, various subtleties, and decisions to be made about the algorithms of how to do that. A lot of the work previously has been done using photographs or video clips to try and evoke different emotions in people and see the response and use that as the hallmarks of the algorithms for effective computing. And it's the good news about this is it's putting us in a position to have more objective assessments. In the field of neuropsychology or all aspects of psychiatry and psychology, often the clinicians are in the awkward spot of asking a patient, how are you doing? How did you feel last week? How did that medication affect you? How did that cognitive behavioral therapy I gave you as homework, did that help? And often it's hard for the patient to give an accurate response, an honest response. It's hard to know your own emotional state. It's also hard to remember how you felt an hour ago or 2 weeks ago. So with effective computing and better wearable sensors and integration, we'll have a better way of understanding what works, what doesn't work, and in a more precision manner, map the treatment to the patient. And I'll give some examples of that. So I think we're in a new position to come up with a whole new way of doing more objective cognitive assessments. Move away from paper and pencil and oral response to questions as a way of indexing change. And when you think about it, if we want to improve our technology that helps us in behavioral medicine or neurorehabilitation, for example, or if we want to improve our medications, we need to have less noisy data, more accurate ways, more objective ways of measuring things. Now, we're making great progress. I think the HP OmniSet head-mounted display that has sensors built in and algorithms to calculate cognitive load is a good exemplar of some of the progress of moving into this space using VR technology. But other groups are doing amazing work too. I'm very impressed by what MTech Labs is doing in terms, and I think in many ways they're the leaders of this application of effective computing to virtual reality technology. They really understand that mood and emotional valence is a complex thing, and we have to have the context. We might have a facial expression or a voice tone or a body movement, but unless we know the context, what might be something that's in response to surprise or to startlement or to anger might be confused with something that's a completely different emotional state where there's similar behavioral expressions. So they're very good at interpreting the context and using a virtual environment to perturb the system and get a response and come up with the analytics behind that. I encourage you to check out that group if you're interested in this topic area. I'm also very impressed by what a company that I advise, Interaxon, the maker of the Muse headset. They have a wearable sensor with EEG, and they have a large library of data set of EEG recordings going back for decades of information. I think it's 150 million minutes of normative data from EEG, and they're using these biosignals to help interpret as part of the effective computing systems. And there's a company I visited just a few weeks ago. I was very surprised at how far along they are. They're in Istanbul, Neo Avra, and they're developing a very complex system for both HR and also for clinical indications to do an analysis of movement, to challenge people with some very fun games. There was one where somebody's throwing you a spray paint can, you're up on a ledge, and you need to spray paint a certain design, and the neuromotor control of the movement, the smoothness of the movement, and your memory of what colors to use and when is all assessed, and they come up with a pretty amazing report. One more example of how sensing can help contribute to a better analysis for better healthcare. But here's the issue, and my concern, is we really need to get it right. I think the group that we're part of right now is going to be pioneering, especially in the clinical arena, starting with applying games to health, this application of sensor technology. But if we're not careful, we'll build in biases. We need to make sure that we reach underserved populations, diverse populations, with looking at different age groups, different backgrounds culturally, and make sure that, especially when it comes to human behavior, we're interpreting it correctly and paying attention to differences. Because what we do now will be picked up by the consumer electronics companies and built into the technology of the future. And it's hard to undo that. We're still stuck with the 8-bit MIDI interface, I believe, going back to the 1970s, I think. So let's get it right. So anyhow, this is all part of a digital health revolution. So there's a context where these issues are being brought forward pretty rapidly. As you know, every medical device has been reinvented over the last 10 years, moving from an analog, handwritten world to a digital world. Medical wearables are becoming more ubiquitous. We're getting better at interpreting voice analytics or passive data from our smartphones as a way of interpreting intent and status. And we're getting better at putting all this together in systems that go from end effectors to nudge the user or the patient to change their behavior or improve their mood, to dashboards that clinicians can use, and lots of data that research scientists can use. And hopefully we're doing a good job of keeping that data protected. We're moving into an era of combination therapy where it's not just a device, it's not just a pill that's prescribed, but along with an app that keeps track of utilization and does combination therapy. And as you know, the tech titans are moving into this area too, and with the shifting regulatory landscape because of COVID and a focus on mental health, things are surging forward. So again, it's an opportunity for us, but I think we need to lead the charge by doing it the right way. Now, there's a lot of emerging and confluent technologies that will help us do this right. Again, medical wearables are allowing us to collect information almost for free from sensors that people are buying and using themselves or at a low cost that we can provide them. Other sensors are developing. We're entering into the era of the Internet of Things, and we can harvest data from our buildings, from our automobiles, from our shoes, to help us with our analytics. And again, with machine learning and new ways of parsing the data, even with small data sets, we're getting better at doing predictive analytics and personalized interventions for the individual. Also, we're thinking about things differently too, thinking more about how can we model a human and try a change to see what the effect will be if the person has a knee surgery or not. How will that affect their job? How will it affect their lifestyle? Are there alternatives? And model that before we do the intervention. And with 5G, we're getting better at doing photorealistic cloud-based rendering for virtual world technology or real-time analytics of complex data sets. There's better medical imaging on the way. So one example is FNIRS technology, where we can, without having to get into a large machine, collect information about functionally what's going on in our brain. We're getting better at measuring not just psychophysiological data like heart rate and electrodermal response, but also things like hormones or glucose levels just by things that we can wear on the surface of our skin. And I think one of the big breakthroughs and waves that's going to make a big difference in this entire area is immersive systems, because we can challenge the individual, see how they react, create the context for our evaluations and for our interventions. And really, it spans a whole stack of medical care. We're seeing XR technology move into training, assessments, lots of interventions, ways to facilitate adherence. And this is where I think VR, AR, MR technology really shines, is it facilitates adherence. It keeps people coming back and continuing to do the often difficult process of healthcare. We're adding new dimensions to our VR systems. I'm really impressed by the spatial systems that provide olfactory clues. And as you know, that can help us evoke emotions and change the mood just by one additional sensory stimulus. We're also getting better with our avatars. They don't look as robotic or creepy. We can personalize them to match our tone of voice, our facial expressions, our gestures, our movements, or not. But the point is we can have much more realistic avatars. And in the field of affective computing, being able to have an avatar that can communicate with you and not be rude by their body language is really important. I think that, and it's not just individual avatars. In virtual worlds right now, if a group of avatars are talking to each other and another avatar walks up, it's almost rude because we don't have an easy way to do what we do automatically, which is to sort of adjust our positioning and either welcome to the group or not. We don't have the capacity to do those sorts of things very easily in many of the virtual world technologies we have right now, but we will, and it's coming. And I'm very impressed with some of the cloud-based, real-time rendered virtual worlds that look almost photorealistic and have lots of content that we can go and be part of. So things are moving pretty well to create the venues to do both assessments and interventions. So as everybody in this room knows, things are moving along pretty fast in our field. Many people feel that AR and VR technology will be the next computer platform that we use. It's well on its way. All the major tech companies are spending so much funds in terms of developing this, both as a recreational device, but also targeting the enterprise. How can we change what we do as an occupation as well as how we entertain and connect with each other? And when you look at it, the speed of acceptance is actually pretty rapid. If you compare it to the VCR or the personal computer or the cell phone, AR and VR technology has been accepted at a faster clip than those previous technologies. So we're getting there. So why is VR and AR technology so profound, and what is the neuroscience behind that? Well, basically, in my opinion, it's because we have the ability to close the feedback loop. We can evaluate how someone responds and dynamically change their experience, which is a basic principle that our colleagues in the game industry use to drive the engine behind their experiences. VR and AR have profound effects on feeling more present, more engaged. We can evolve our bodies too, so we leverage muscle memory, and we can directly target the brain's reward system with an experience by come up with something that is personalized to the individual style, what motivates them. And this is actually a direct way to change our brains. By stimulating our brain's reward system, we facilitate neuroplasticity. By shortening the reward feedback loop, we show people the effects of their decisions. If you exercise or if you change your diet or decide to not drink as much alcohol, it's really hard to understand the value of that immediately. But we can show that in a virtual reality system. People can learn the consequences of their choices in a way that we never could before. And again, I think very importantly, leveraging our mirror neuron systems, the parts of our brain that allow us to interpret other people's mood state and behavior. We can use that principle as part of our design for both games and also for healthcare applications. An example of that, of leveraging the brain's mirror neurons, is some of the work that we did at the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab, where we age-progressed an avatar of an individual, had them spend some time connecting with their age-progressed avatar, having a conversation with that avatar. Doing that facilitates making changes. In one study at Stanford, we gave the students some cash and said, you can do whatever you want to do with it. Those who got to know their future self, who had a dialogue with their future self, put money aside towards retirement, where very few of the other students chose to do that. So it's just an example of how we can leverage the brain's social systems by connecting and motivating ourselves and closing that feedback loop. I think the other reason VR and AR technologies are very profound, and again, it's going to have a big impact on the overarching aspect of effective computing, is that it involves us to actively involve the user, to have them feel more agency in the experience they're having. We give them feedback on their behavior and the changes they make. And it's a cost-effective way to reach other people. And most importantly, we can build a narrative story arc. I think healthcare is difficult. It's not easy at all. It's boring, it's painful sometimes, and it's sometimes difficult to understand the value of what you're doing. But we can take the techniques and learnings from our colleagues in the film industry and the game industry and build a narrative story arc using VR and AR technologies as part of it. And I think that's going to make a big difference in terms of making medicine and healthcare more palatable and also facilitating adherence. And that's really important. We know from mobile-based apps for healthcare, there's a huge dropout rate. Most people drop out after using them just 1 or 2 weeks. We don't see that with VR and AR systems in healthcare. If you go and talk to Nanea Reeves of TRIP, she'll tell you about the adherence rate she has with her VR systems. So I think we're at a tipping point. We've now had more than 30 years of research and development on VR and AR systems in the clinical laboratory that's being moved out into the mainstream, starting to be adopted by pioneering hospitals and clinics, and soon will be part of healthcare everywhere. And I think that, again, as we start moving in the techniques that are part of the game arena into this, we have to be careful to make sure, especially when we use sensing of cognitive and mood state, that we get it right and don't build in prejudices and biases. So just some examples of what's going on right now. There's more than 330 by now, I'm sure, examples of early stage companies and academic groups that have targeted a whole plethora of medical problems, depression, phobias, better assessments, addressing both acute and chronic pain, surgical skill training. A very, very long list. It's really starting to take off. We've seen a huge amount of investment coming into this arena. It's projected this will be a $5 billion market by 2026. Examples include improved training. In the case of effective computing, we're seeing it in terms of teaching students how to interact with a virtual patient, to be able to do a patient history, to do interpersonal skill training, and then also recognize emotional state in your colleagues so that you can provide help when you might be in distress. We're coming up with ways to work with a virtual patient to learn how to have a better user interface with clients so that you don't have to do that on the job. And this becomes particularly important when delivering bad news. If you're giving a family or an individual news about a terminal illness, it's not the sort of thing that you want to do without the proper amount of understanding and compassion. But that's hard to do especially as you're starting out as a new student. So we can simulate that difficult chore of giving out bad news, and people learn how to have those critical conversations in a simulation and transfer that empathy to the clinical environment. Again, much more effective assessments. With being able to capture movement, we can measure much more precisely whether somebody has the right capabilities after a stroke or an injury to take care of themselves by measuring activities of daily living. Very broad applications in occupational therapy, physical therapy. I'm really impressed by the work of Lee Williams, one of my colleagues at Stanford Healthcare. What Lee has done is set up the Stanford Center for Precision Mental Health and Wellness. And she uses a variety of systems, including VR technology, medical imaging, understanding genetics. She measures a lot, and then she decides what biotype an individual is. And that sends them down a different clinical pathway. In my opinion, that's really how all aspects of medicine should be, that we identify different types of people and make the right decisions for their health care rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. I'm impressed by some of the startups that are out there doing things such as coming up with vocal biomarkers for anxiety and depression. So we finally have something that, other than a paper and pencil test, to help us index mood state. And again, this is ending up with much more effective interventions. Examples are in physical medicine, like stroke and traumatic brain injury rehabilitation. A lot's going on in mental health care, and again, we're all aware of the urgent need there. I can't think of a single area of mental health care that has not had some amazing pioneering work enabled by VR and AR technology. Attention deficit disorder, autism, depression, anxiety, addictions. It's really amazing where we've been able to make a difference and really make a significant difference using virtual environments for not just distracting from pain, but teaching people the cognitive skills to manage chronic pain. Ways to use exposure therapy to help with post-traumatic stress or phobias or other anxiety disorders. With addressing cravings and addictions, we're very effective using a virtual environment to teach people how to handle peer pressure, how to handle your triggers, how to learn how to manage your addictions. And something that if you're just using your imagination to learn how to handle something, you just can't really effectively do that. But with the help of a simulation, we can teach people the skills they need. And then there's a lot going on in preventive health and wellness, helping address feelings of isolation, stress management, teaching resilient skills. And as a disability interface, VR and AR technology is particularly effective. And then again, I think we're entering into an era where we can leverage effective computing and the sensing that will come out of it, and the algorithms, to do a better job of improving mental health care and behavioral health care. So to summarize, right now we're seeing a surge of the technology that has grown out of the virtual reality and augmented reality consumer arena being applied to healthcare. It's putting a layer of biosensing on top of that to improve our data collection and come up with a library of evocative environments that can be used to challenge an individual and to assess their mental, their cognitive state, and use that information for better modeling and treatment of disease. We're moving beyond just seeing this used in the laboratories. They're being used right now out in some of the early adopter pioneering clinical networks. And I think it's not too long we'll see it out there. Because of it doesn't cost very much to put an AR system or a VR system into a clinical situation. There's so much to be gained. I think we're poised to see this move out at an even faster rate. And what we're doing in this arena will be leveraged by the consumer electronics companies and others as they design the next generation of automobiles, of refrigerators, of buildings, of toothbrushes, whatever, that is going to be paying attention to us, harvesting data from us, building a model of us, and using it to improve efficiency. But as I'm sure you're very aware, there's dangers behind this, and we need to get ahead of it so that as this wave of new technology comes out and moves from the healthcare arena into the consumer arena, we've locked down the right privacy issues, the right ethical issues. And I think it's an important conversation we need to have since we are part of the advanced wave of making this happen. So let's work together and try and get it right. The implications are very significant. The profound nature of this technology is important, especially in healthcare, but there's also some risks involved. So thank you for your attention.